Uh, I'd like to welcome everybody to Heterodox Academy Forum, Mahmoud, Khalil, Controversy and Global Implications. Um, we have three great speakers. Pr Professor Shai Davidai from Columbia University, Jonathan Zimmerman from UPenn, and Joseph E. from Hanyang. And we also have two great moderators. Alexander Arler and Francis. Moderate Alex and Francis, can you introduce yourselves?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Alex Solar, a philosopher at the National Hanyang University in Taiwan, Taipei. And I don't know if Francis has joined yet.
Okay, when Francis joins, she can let us know. Okay, so let's start with some informal little introduction from Shai Davidai. Professor, go ahead, introduce
Yeah.
yourself.
Hi, everyone. So first of all, I want to thank you for having me. I honestly, like a lot of times, I don't do anything after my kids go to sleep in terms of like these kind of things, but I honestly just wanted to come and hear whatever people have to say about this issue. I'm hoping it's going to be heterodox rather than the homogenous views that I've been hearing. Um, there's a lot of things to say about me. I don't know what matters, what's not. I'll go with like the basics. I am Israeli. I moved to the US 15 years ago to get my graduate's degree. Like Mahmoud Khalil, I'm here on a green card. Like him, it's through marriage. Like him, I came here on a student visa. So we actually have a lot of things in common. Most people know Mahmoud Khalil from the past month or so. I've been tracking this guy since a year and a half ago. What happened was that on October 7th, as probably most people or everyone here knows, Hamas engaged in the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. This was the worst massacre of any person in the history of Israel. And well, not about, exactly 24 hours later, students at Columbia and other student organizations, Columbia and other places, started organizing in support of that action, the massacre. Why do I say organizing in support of that massacre? Because we have to remember the timeline. This is before Israel responded. This is before any Israeli soldier, weeks before any Israeli soldier entered Gaza. And this was while the massacre was still going on. So the Hamas terrorists were in the land of Israel until around October 10th, until the fighting ended. So while that was happening, already we had protests here. The first protest at Columbia University was on October 12th. So it's important to me to mention all the timeline because there's all these news and everything, and we have to make sure that we know exactly what happened when. Now it's easy to say, a year and a half later, we're protesting a war, we're protesting this. And by the way, the war has been horrible. I'm not apologizing for anything. And yet, you cannot oppose a war before it started unless you are supporting the side that started the war, right? But more to our case, I've been probably definitely the most vocal person to speak about what's happening on campuses at Columbia, and probably the most vocal to speak about what's happening on campuses in the United States and maybe even the entire world. Not because there's something special about me. There's nothing special about me. It's more of a timing kind of thing. On October 18th, I spoke up at an anti-terror vigil on campus. The video of me speaking up went viral. About 15 million people saw it. And since then, I've been tracking what's happening on Columbia and other campuses. I've testified in front of Congress. I've organized rallies and demonstrations, etc. I have been one of the things that I've mostly called for the past year and a half is accountability. And the reason that I think it was so important, too bad that people didn't listen to accountability, is because everything we're seeing right now, the good, the bad, and the ugly, could have been prevented. Everything could have been prevented. Mahmoud Khalil when he led the first protests on October 12th, 2023, was speaking much different than when he was taking over buildings on February and March 2025 and all the time in between, right? If Colombia had enforced some sort of their own rules, which were being broken, and they failed to enforce, if they have led to some accountability, this radicalization wouldn't have happened. Mahmoud Khalil could have been with his wife that is due to give birth. A lot of things that are horrible things that have happened to multiple people would not have happened. At the same time, and I want to mention clearly, like, I feel complete empathy for Mahmoud Khalil's wife. I feel like even if I completely disagree with a person's stance, even if I think a person should be held accountable, I can still feel a lot of empathy for them. At the same time, I don't think it's a controversy. I think this is a made-up controversy by politicians and the media who are using Mahmoud Khalil as a pawn. It's not for nothing that within 72 hours of being arrested, he had 19 lawyers and $350,000 in donations. These are bigger organizations that are using this guy as a pawn. This isn't about free speech. This has nothing to do with free speech. Free speech is an extremely important issue. And other cases, by the way, of student activists being detained and potentially deported are about free speech. With Mahmoud Khalil specifically, it's not about free speech. It's about breaking his conditions of his green card. It's about his leading an organization that repeatedly took over university buildings, hospitalized multiple university staff, handed out Hamas, US designated terrorist organizations propaganda repeatedly, and multiple other things. So I think there's a lot of questions that come out of this case. One is, given that that we have a spectrum from thoughts you think, things you say, all the way to actions that you take, at some point we have to draw a line and say, this is no longer speech, this is action, right? Because if we don't, then someone can come and shoot someone else and say, that is my free speech, shooting someone else. So one thing is drawing a line of what we count as action rather than freedom of speech. The other thing that the question is, clearly to everyone that I think it's clear to everyone that we have to draw a line somewhere in what is support for terrorism, right? Clearly, if I just think in my mind, this terrorist organization is good, I may be a horrible person, but that's my freedom. Clearly, if I strap on a suicide belt and in the name of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, go and board the subway and explode myself with 25 other people that I murder, that is clearly, support for terrorism or actual terrorism, and it's bad. But at what point do we say this is material support for terrorism, right? And the third question that I think comes out of this, which honestly will be the question that probably ends up with the Supreme Court, is what are the rights of citizens versus permanent residents, green card holders, versus visa students, visa holders, right? Clearly, those are three different categories, and within visa, we have other categories because they involve different obligations, different rights of how long you can stay, what you can or can't do, how often you can go in or out. So clearly, we're already treating the three different categories differently, as every country in the world does. The question is, do the same rights, for example, in engaging in illegal activity, are green card holders, visa holders, are they protected in the same degree as citizens or not, right? So those are the three things. I don't think it's controversial. I think once we call it a controversy, we stop talking when we start arguing and shouting over each other. But to me, those are the big questions that are coming up from this entire issue. That's me and everything in a nutshell, but I'm looking forward to having a conversation.
Okay, thank you, Shai. Okay, Professor Jonathan Zimmerman, you're up.
Thank you for having me, and thanks to everybody for joining. And thanks especially to Shai Davidai for joining. I'm a big fan of his. And I thought it was really interesting in his very eloquent remarks that we just heard that he did not point out that the university has also restricted his free speech. And I think that's really important for this discussion. So Shai can tell us later why he didn't share that with you, but I'm going to, if it's okay by him. It's all public record. Um, and from what I've read and from what I've written about, he got on the wrong side of some administrators at Columbia who said that he was running afoul of their rules. A moment ago, Shai Davidai said that Mahmoud Khalil ran afoul of the rules. Well, we should note that Columbia said that he was afoul of the rules because they passed some rules saying you can't defame a specific individual. And they said that our friend Dr. Davidai had done that by following around some administrator with a camera who he thought wasn't taking sufficient steps to protect Israeli students and saying, why aren't you protecting Israeli students? I want to be absolutely clear about this. I feel that that was a fundamental violation of Shai Davidai's rights. And I don't care if he's got a green card or he doesn't, or he's a citizen or he has a visa. That's a fundamental abrogation of how universities should work. And because I support his rights, I also support the rights of people who think differently from him. Shai Davidai asked us, quote, where is the line between speech and action? I think that's exactly the right question. And I think we have 100 years of constitutional law in our country that answers that question. And especially at a time when it seems like our leaders are ignoring the Constitution, it is absolutely imperative that we follow it. Shai Davidai's rights were violated because he did not pose an immediate and direct threat of physical violence or intimidation. I know his oppressors said that he did, and they were wrong. You just can't call that and say, I don't like what you said, it's intimidating me. Oh no, that's not America. All right? In America, this is how it works. If you want to muzzle anybody, citizen or non-citizen, the burden is on you to show that their speech posed an immediate and direct threat of physical harm. I thought it was really interesting that Shai began his remarks not by telling us that Columbia had violated his free speech rights, which it did, but instead began his remarks by telling us how despicable he thought the pro-Hamas speakers were who began their pro-Hamas speech before the war even began. On the content of that speech, I agree with him 100%. I'm not Israeli, but I am Jewish. Like a lot of American Jews, I have relatives in Israel. They've been there since the 1930s. I agree with him that that speech was despicable and vile. You know what? In America, you have a right to despicable and vile speech. And here's why. If we decide we're going to ban despicable and vile speech, we're going to have to empower somebody in the state to tell us what that is. And I don't trust the state enough for that, especially the state is currently constituted. Do you really want Donald J. Trump telling you what's so despicable and vile that you can't say it? Maybe you do, but I don't. In no way am I contesting Shai Davidai's estimation, that is his moral condemnation of that speech, because I agree with it 1,000%. But I am strongly contesting his implication that because it was vile, which it was, that we should be censoring it.
Oh, I didn't, but John, that's what I said. That's not what I said at all.
Well, I think what you said was that it wasn't speech anymore.
No. I said the moment they started taking over buildings, right?
Right.
That's when. So I completely agree. Like vile speech is speech. By the way, we should also make note that Columbia University is not bound by the First Amendment, right? If we're going to go by the Constitution, then Columbia
Correct, but
University
it claims to abide by those norms.
right.
And I believe it was in violation of those norms when
Claims,
they
but
kicked you off
but we
campus.
but Mahmoud Khalil did not was not detained, arrested, and up for deportation because of the things that he said. It's because the 3 days before he was detained, he led the taking over of a university building.
But see, here's
One
where the
second.
details
One second.
matter,
The
right?
details do matter. A week before, he was also the leader of
I
of
know.
the
But
takeover.
again, Shai, the leader, I mean, look, is it illegal to block somebody from coming into a building? It absolutely is, right? And if there's tape of Mahmoud Khalil physically blocking somebody from entering a building, I think you should be held accountable for that. But to say that we're going to deport him because he led a movement that blocked buildings, that's not America. That is just not America to me, right?
No, well,
We
well,
we
but
we live
that's
in
not
a
what he's
land
doing.
of laws. It is illegal to block people from entering buildings. It is not illegal to say, hey, I love Hamas and let's go ahead and block buildings.
I
That's
agree.
not illegal.
But that's so first of all, we have to remember why is he being, why was he arrested? Right? We can say a lot of things, but the law for green card holders, which I unfortunately had to learn a lot about because I am a green card holder, is that you don't have to be you don't have to be arrested by any other federal or state arm for illegal activity to be deported, right? So we have to remember that. But the other thing is, Mahmoud Khalil is not just one protester who came to a university building and then blocked it not once but twice within a week, right? Mahmoud Khalil is not the one person that came and said, let's set up an encampment on campus where we're going to exclude Jews and Israelis. He wasn't there isn't like him holding, but he was not just the self-identified leader, but identified by everyone else. He was the lead negotiator.
Yeah.
So
He,
unless
he
so wait,
spoke with the people of Columbia constantly.
right, he was the leader of the organization that you said is breaking the rules, that is doing illegal stuff, right? So
And so we should just let's investigate everyone at Columbia
no,
and
no,
just
no.
see what sort of leadership role they played in this. Let's
Oh,
look at all their Facebook stuff. Let's see who besides him was also a leader. Actually, let's do that for every campus. And let's
it's
try to identify all the very bad leaders that said very, very bad things.
well,
Again,
it's interesting.
uh, you really want to go there?
I
I mean,
I know
you really
because
want to go there?
I do think that if you have an activity that you have identified as illegal, not me, John, John, is it John? Yeah,
Yeah, John. Yeah, yeah.
you identified as illegal, and yet you're saying no one will be held accountable because we're going to split everyone to like these amorphous leaders which we can't examine, and the students that are there we can't because it's for
Shai, we
freedom,
do hold people accountable. We hold people accountable for breaking the law.
right?
Okay. Um, Barricading a building or putting your body in front of somebody who's trying to go in there to study, you're breaking the law. All
But
right.
that's not that, by the way, that's not what they did. If we want to talk details, we want to talk details. It's not they didn't barricade, which is illegal. They didn't block people. And there's videos. You see them, stomping over a public safety official that had to go be hospitalized.
Again, if he stomps the public safety official, right,
And
he should be
and
held accountable for that. But
and
if we start to say anybody who praises this activity,
no, no,
who
no,
leads this activity,
not praises, leads,
leads, right, right.
leads.
Who are the other leaders?
We
Let's
actually
do a
know,
deep dive. Let's do some investigating.
but we don't need
Let's find
investigating,
all the
John.
leaders, all the people
But
that said the very bad
no,
thing.
no, no, not the
Let's do
people
it.
that no,
Go
no, not the
for it.
people. You
And
keep
you're gonna
changing.
get screwed, my friend.
No,
You will be
but
screwed.
you
Somebody
keep you
will say
keep
the
changing,
IDF
but you
is a
keep changing
terrorist
the
organization,
goalposts.
and you'll be
But
effed.
John, but
Good luck.
you keep changing the goalposts. That's exactly it. Not people that said. We actually know who the leaders are because they have told us. And actually, most of the leaders have been suspended from campus. Mariam Iqbal was suspended for a semester. Aiden Parisi was suspended indefinitely. Grant something Grant, I forget, is was expelled indefinitely. We know who the leaders are. And if you're going to make the argument that you cannot go after the leaders because we don't have videos of the leaders actually doing the thing. What you're doing is you're basically saying leaders get a carte blanche. They can do whatever they want, but because we didn't have a video of them doing
No,
the
no, I think everyone in America gets a carte blanche for the things they say. And
we're not talking about saying, we're talking about doing.
right, but
Don't
again,
change the goalposts. Yeah.
right, but doing what? These
Taking
are
over
speech
buildings,
acts, they're
hospitalizing.
speech acts until they're crimes. And speech acts in America are not crimes,
So we're not
right?
talking about speech acts. We're talking about taking over a university building twice in a week. We're talking about setting up an encampment that excludes, that basically violates 1964 Civil Rights Act. We're talking about the taking over of Hamilton Hall. We're talking about things that are not speech, that are actions. Now, I agree with you with speech. 100%. That's why I'm actually very concerned about the more recent arrests and potential deportations, because no matter how vile you are, you should be able to sign a letter, write an op-ed, stand in the middle of the quad with a bullhorn. Of course, once you cross into activity that violates the law, that
I
violates
know, but
other people's rights.
I've seen no evidence that Khalil violated the law,
Okay.
right? I know that there was violation of the law, right? And you've mentioned some of them. But I've seen no evidence that he violated the law in the way that I understand the law. I mean, I should emphasize that I'm not a lawyer, I'm a historian,
Yeah.
right? But because I'm a historian, I'm extremely worried about precedent
It's interesting to me because
because,
obviously the comparison is very bad, and I'll call it up from the moment I begin, right? It's very bad, but how many of those tried and hanged in the Nuremberg trials were actually present at a death camp or concentration camp? How many of them have seen or pulled the trigger or done anything? In fact, the one big thing, the Wannsee conference, where the final solution was decided upon, the one person was very notably not there, Adolf Hitler, but he was the leader, right? So you want to so when you say like, look, I agree, the mob broke the law. I agree. The breaking of the law was not have anything to do with speech. We also know that this person is the leader of the mob that's orchestrated everything, and yet I will not hold them accountable. That to me is not about free speech. It's about something else entirely, which I actually don't know how to label, but it has nothing to do with speech.
Shai and Jonathan, we need to move on. I think we have a lot of questions and comments.
Of course.
And then after my presentation, I was actually going to ask two questions. My first question for both of you is, do we have evidence that Mahmoud Khalil had like operational control over those people who did violate the law, such as invading buildings? So that's question number one. And then question number two is the 1952 law, the Cold War era statute that allows the Secretary of State to, deport anyone for undermining the U.S. national interest. If this case goes up to the Supreme Court, do you think the court should declare it unconstitutional? So your thoughts on the matter. Okay, but that's later. But let me first do my quick presentation, and then let's go to the audience Q&As. I'm sure people have a lot of things to say. Now, on the chat, I put in the presentation. So audience members, please click on the presentation. And then I'm going to share my screen. Okay, screen, I think it's Alt S. Is it Alt S? No, Alt. Okay, great. Kongyu? Okay, all right. So everybody sees my presentation, right? Okay, how come I cannot go there? All right. Okay, so my name is Joseph Yi. I'm a political science professor at Hanyang University in Seoul. So thank you for those in the America East Coast. It's late, but for us, it's pretty early in the morning. Okay, now, so why why Mahmoud Khalil controversy? Why does it matter for East Asia? And it matters because many critics of speech and academic freedom in East Asia find validation from Western democracies. So in China, Hong Kong recently denied a work visa renewal for Professor Rowana Hay, who is Canadian of Chinese descent, for slandering China in her courses about Chinese history and Tiananmen Square. Hong Kong also imprisoned pro-democracy activist Zhou Xiaowang for advocating terrorism because not he directly, but a few of his fellow protesters engaged in acts of violence. And then number 3, a teacher, Shanghai Aurora College's Song Geng-yi, lectured about the Nanjing massacre, the estimates ranging from 500,000 to 3,000, but a student selectively edited the 500,000 statement from the video clip, and she was subsequently terminated. This happens not only in one-party states, but also in democracies such as South Korea, where both conservative and progressive parties exercise power to silence harmful speech. So the Yoon administration, so the police raided the home of a pro-unification Christian pastor for publishing and sharing allegedly pro-North Korea material. In October 2024, immigration authorities issued an entry ban against Korean American peace activist Christine An without any explanation. Okay. We also see this suppression among progressive governments, where the government and pro-government supporters punish speech that harms former victims of colonial or authoritarian regimes. So in 2018, a 6-month prison sentence for Professor Song, who suggested that most North Korean comfort women had volunteered. And then in 2023, a 2-year prison sentence for Ji Man-won for suggesting that North Korean agents were involved in the 1980 democracy movement in Gwangju. In 2021, to give a personal example, I co-authored an essay calling for more open debate on historical issues for debating, not censuring, Harvard law professor Mark Ramsier, who wrote a provocative thesis that most Korean comfort women signed contracts with advance payments. Afterwards, the Social Science Student Council released an edited recording of my class lecture, which went, and this was publicized in all the media, that says, Hanyang 교수, to translate, it says that I called that Korean historians are a bunch of nationalist liars. Okay, but the full recording was actually Lee Young-hoon. He says that Korean historians are a bunch of nationalist liars. Okay, so they edited half. And then afterwards, the ruling Democratic lawmaker Kim Young-min slurred Professor Yi as a Jap money professor, and more than 1,500 students petitioned for my termination. And to this day, Korean students are boycotting my class because of that selective editing. Okay. Now, censorship proponents find validation from similar policies and actions in advanced democracies. After teacher Song was fired, the China's Global Times reminded readers that German and USA governments do the same things. In Germany, those publicly questioning the Holocaust can be sent into jail. In the US, a teacher trampled on a US flag and was fired when the school board made unanimous decision. So this is China's, party newspaper. South Korean activists similarly cite US-based academics. So the LA Times, South Korean conservatives have promoted conspiracy theories that the Gwangju protests were an act of North Korean subterfuge. The Hangyorae, this professor of economics at Yale released a statement that criticized Ramsier for defending child prostitution. An international chorus of historians called for the articles to be retrieved from the New York Times. And so the Korean activists are saying, look, American professors, American media, the New York Times, LA Times, they support us. So it's okay to censor, these far-right scholars, far-right activists. Okay, so U.S. policy historically, yes, it's the policy of the U.S. government to combat hate, combat anti-Semitism, but it's also the policy of the U.S. government to promote speech and academic freedom worldwide, including in China. And I feel that policy 1 and 2 are compatible to the extent that government officials, scholars, and journalists respect liberal procedural rules and norms, such as due process and objective scholarship. To the extent that they do not, policy 1 and 2 become incompatible, and Americans offer validation for authoritarian governments and activists abroad. And so I have 2 questions. Are U.S. officials arresting non-citizens with minimal due process and evidence of criminal violations? And question number 2, do pro-government activists target non-citizens by selectively quoting their words or actions out of context, or by stressing their connections, however loose, to criminal violent actors? So liberal-minded governments, I feel, should respect individual rights. Scholars and journalists should not selectively cite data to stereotype as villain or victim, but carefully portray and analyze the entire data. And I hope that we can objectively discuss the cases of Mahmoud Khalil and other controversies. As members of heterodox East Asia community, we discuss issues related to individual freedom in both one-party states, North Korea, China, and multi-party democracies. We are grateful to the members of US-based Heterodox Academy for supporting our efforts and for recognizing that freedom anywhere strengthens freedom everywhere. Thank you. Okay, and then I had at least one student who wanted to say something. Gabriel Park, are you here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Hi.
go ahead, Gabriel. You want to say something?
Yeah. So, hello, my name's Gabrielle, and I'm an eighth grader at Oxford Academy in California. And so I believe that unless the government provides evidence against Khalil, he should not be getting deported from a country that values free speech. Khalil is going through removal procedures because of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which permits deportation of legal residents if the Secretary of State believes that their presence risks potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. However, I believe that this law is too arbitrary, and I believe that the Congress should repeal this law for being unconstitutional. It violates the
I think she says, anyway, well, anyway, thank you, Gabriel. We had some technical problems. Okay, Alex is our moderator for Q&A. Alex? Mhm.
Okay, well then let me thank all the speakers for their contributions. And Joseph, you raised already some questions for our speakers, and one of them had to do with the evidence of Khalil's leadership when it came to taking over buildings at Columbia and his control over the people who are involved in those actions. So I think this speaks to one issue already that we see emerging from this debate, is that there seems to me that there is disagreement about some of the basic facts involved. So Professor Davidai is saying that Khalil was the leader of the people who took over the buildings at Columbia. I think Khalil and people who defend him, and I think Professor Davidai's own institution, are gonna deny this. They would say there was no evidence that was the case. I think there was an investigation, in fact, into Khalil by Columbia that found him innocent of wrongdoing. So it seems that we have some disagreement about basic facts here. But
No,
maybe I can let
yeah, it's
Professor
great.
Davidai and Professor Zimmerman respond to
I
your
should
question,
say
Joseph.
I should say that Mahmoud Khalil, up until the point that he was arrested, never denied that he was the leader. He actually self-identified as the leader when he nominated to negotiate, to be the one that negotiates. And I do want to tell you a short story about this, because the day before, or 2 days before Mahmoud Khalil was arrested, I was in a protest. I was leading a protest outside of Columbia, and we were using a bullhorn. And at some point, the NYPD came and said, "You don't have a permit to use a bullhorn. You cannot use a bullhorn." And the people with me said, like, "No, let's keep doing. Let's." And I told them, "I am on a green card. I cannot break the law. You want to hold the bullhorn and use it? That's fine. I'll use my voice. Now, why am I saying that as an important thing? Because we all know, like, the bullhorn symbolizes something here. It's not just an amplification. On the second time that Khalil orchestrated the taking over of a Barnard building, and on the first time, but on the second time, the videos are very clear. He is the one holding the bullhorn with which he's leading the negotiations with the university. Mahmoud Khalil self-identified as the leader. This is not me, but I do agree. The question that Joseph brought up are actually really important. I believe that with Mahmoud Khalil, we should have full transparency. The case is an open and shut case. And by the way, unlike other of these people, he's not being charged by the 1952 law. Right? There are multiple other violations of a green card that he's being charged to, not the least the fact that he failed to identify certain important things in his green card application, which would have denied him getting a green card in the first place, and none of us would be having this conversation, right? So that's why it's so important. There's so many cases happening right now. Today I saw about the 132nd student from the UC system, which is a lot. I am sure some of them deserve it. Some of it are completely don't deserve it. But if we put everything together and pile everything together, we can't really talk about the evidence and the nuance. So like you mentioned,
I agree with that.
You mentioned Colombia not finding Khalil of any wrongdoing. That's not correct. First of all, that is from something that happened in April of 2024. They found him. Actually in bad behavior. They suspended him, and within 48 hours, and not just him, many others, they completely reversed the suspension because of political stuff that's happening at the university. So so not that Colombia is the arbiter. I think Colombia is not the arbiter here. But we need to make sure that we talk about all the evidence here, which is extremely important.
Right, but I think
let's first hear from the audience members, and then I give you guys both a lot of time to respond. Alex, can you go ahead and call on people?
Okay, yes, if people want to raise their virtual hands, we have Russell Yim. Please unmute yourself.
Right. Sean, you also had a comment to share, right?
Yes, that's correct. But I'll wait for everyone else to ask their questions first.
Okay, sure. Okay, Russell.
Thank you. I sort of had two main questions here regarding the argument. First, to what extent does the United States have the sort of right to protest? Like what exactly is included within the right to protest? Because as I'm understanding, he was protesting within university grounds, and of the charges blocking access to buildings, which happens, as I'm aware, happens a lot during protests anyway. So I would like to ask, like, what exactly is the extent to the right to protest that students and general citizens and non-citizens have in the U.S. And two, so on the charges on Khalil, right? I was sort of confused as to the charge for of how this is in U.S. government's interest, as he's protesting against the actions of a foreign state and not the United States itself. If anyone would like to answer those questions.
I can try. I don't know if I get so. First of all, again, because it's a private university, Columbia can set its own protest rules. Some universities have very strict, some have more loose. Columbia has, throughout the last year and a half, loosened their policies quite a bit. Partially so they don't have to enforce the rules, but that's a different thing. But the rules right now say that you cannot use amplification, you cannot protest inside buildings, you cannot disrupt academic life. All three of those things were done. Your second question about U.S. interests, that is an interesting question. Again, when the United States designates a terrorist organization, activity, again, not speech, but activity in support of that terrorist organization, I believe is in the state's interest. Not just when it's like in the Middle East, it can be with Boko Haram in Africa, it can be with many things. Now, some may argue, why is this organization a terrorist organization and that isn't? Well, that's where democracy comes in, right? When if most people disagree, then they would vote in a state's secretary that would change the definition of X, Y, and Z as a terrorist organization. That's my understanding of the foreign interest or the U.S. interest.
Look, there are two different things going on here, it seems to me, in this conversation. There's a set of questions about what Columbia's rules should be, and then there are a set of questions about what American law is. Now, Shai's right. Columbia is a private institution. It sets its own rules. What he still hasn't told us is that Columbia used those rules to muzzle him. Columbia said that he was engaging in intimidation. I'm quoting what they said, and that he was engaging in harassment.
Yeah,
Now,
but
both of those things,
Yeah.
right, are actually illegal, right? I mean, there are laws against harassment and intimidation. But because we do live in a democracy, you just can't call anything you don't like harassment or intimidation.
That's where you're wrong. A private institution, and that's what I had to learn with my lawyers. A private institution can
Right,
determine.
but Shai, they shouldn't. That's my
Well,
point.
okay, so
They
the
shouldn't,
can versus
right? Yeah, they can. But they also, if you look at their website and you look at their pages, they're all about free speech and the Constitution, the First Amendment, and how they value open inquiry, right? What you
Exactly.
just said is true, but that marks them as hypocrites. They can't, in the
Oh,
same
yeah.
breath,
Of
right,
course.
say that they support this value of open inquiry and then say, no, but Shai Davidai can't come onto the campus because he engaged in intimidation and harassment, and we get to say what that is. So that just strikes me as incredibly inconsistent. Now, with respect to the law, I think Gabriella had it exactly right. The fact that he was arrested at his apartment, in the evening, right, when he just comes home one day, the state wasn't particularly interested in like what rules Columbia had, right? They invoke this 1952 Cold War law saying that, we can deport people who are working against the foreign policy interests of the United States. Now, this law has almost never been invoked. And if it does face constitutional inquiry, my deepest hope is that it will be struck down as absurdly unconstitutional. Because where exactly would that stop? Let's imagine that Trump continues to say that the Ukraine invaded Russia, which, by the way, it didn't. It was the other way around. But that's become our foreign policy. Now, if a Ukrainian group protests that, they're in violation of this 1952 law. Where does that stop? It has no stop. So he was arrested under that law. Now, Shai is right. Ex post facto, after all this, they found that he had made some errors in his application. But that happened after he was arrested, and we know that.
And here's the thing. I think you're absolutely right with your argument. You made a slippery slope argument, basically. And in my experience, every slippery slope argument has the opposite slippery slope argument, right? And by the way, I actually am in support in tying any government's hands, and if it's left or right, if it's here or anywhere else, tying it as much as possible. At the same time, you can make the exact slippery slope argument that you made on the opposite end, which is, where does it stop? At what point do you say this person is posing a real threat, not by holding a gun to someone's hand, right? But by directing those that holding the gun to someone's head, right? So the truth is,
but again, I think this gets back to Russell's question, because he was asking something similar. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. We have 100 years of American constitutional law that's exactly on the question that you're raising. And especially at a moment where it seems like the Constitution itself is under enormous strain and duress.
I agree that we don't
follow that law.
I agree we don't, whenever someone says let's reinvent the wheel, they're wrong. At the same time, we have to remember we are not living in the same world of 100 years ago, right? And the world has changed. And if you do not change your reaction to a world that has changed, your laws are no longer sufficient both to ensure free speech, but also to ensure people's safety protection, right? Those are the two things that are on the balance here. The equality versus, so I think that's something that needs to be updated. I hope this gets to the Supreme Court to get a bit more clarity, to get a bit more of what
I agree.
government can and can't do, right? Again, Mahmoud Khalil is, I believe, an open and shut case. Like one of the questions that Joseph brought up is like about his due process. I have seen zero evidence of his due process being, affected, right? In fact, we do know, exactly where he was booked. He know exactly where he was moved. We know exactly all of his, I think he's been 3 or 4 times in front of a judge by now. We haven't, like, due process is to me, one of the most important things. And we haven't seen evidence that he's not receiving his due process. Now we have problems about other stuff, right? Like, should they have come at Saturday evening, in his apartment lobby? Probably not, right? Should have he come with like unmarked vehicles? By the way, that's how ICE does it, not just with Colombia pro-Hamas supporters, but with any person that ICE detains. That's not a nice thing to do. I think they could have done it better, but it's not a violation of due process, right? So if we want to talk about due process, we need to make sure that is there any evidence that he didn't receive his due process? And if there is, I haven't seen it, but I'm open. Yeah.
Okay. So next, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but your screen name is JCP11.
Joe. It's Joe. I'm sorry. I didn't know that wasn't up there. Shai, I just wanted to clarify. I just want to really understand your position a little better. So I take it from what you've said that, well, let me first preface this by saying, civil disobedience, as you know, is a long and in many people's mind, admirable history in the United States and other countries. So I take it from what you're saying, any form of civil disobedience would be grounds for deporting someone.
Why would you take?
Because you made the distinction between actions and speech, and you, as I understood what you're saying, you've made a big deal out of illegal actions, and civil disobedience is, of course, engaging in illegal actions for a political purpose or for some type of advocacy. And you seem to be trying to draw some kind of neutral, objective standard that separates speech from actions, whereas speech would not be a justification for deportation, but actions would be. So what I'm asking is any form of civil disobedience for any purpose, any type of advocacy would be grounds for deporting someone. Okay, well, how would you? Okay, well, explain to me.
That's where. So the first question that I raise is we, and I say not we as the people in this Zoom, but we as a society have to decide at what point do we draw the line between speech and action, right? Now, it's not up to me. I'm neither narcissistic nor smart enough to think that I can decide that line. But yes, I believe that certain actions are to the extent that they are illegal, they hold accountability. Even if you go back to Thoreau's, civil disobedience, he's in jail for his civil disobedience. The whole point of civil disobedience is that you break the law, you spend your time to show that you think the law or something is unacceptable. Well, if you're a green card holder or a visa, right, breaking the law has different consequences than if you're a citizen.
I agree. That's what I just want to make sure I understand. And so any type of civil disobedience. So if Khalil if this was the 1950s and Khalil was engaging in he was a freedom rider going into the southern United States, breaking the segregation laws in terms of integrating bus stations, you would say he should be deported. Or if this was the 1960s and he was storming.
I don't like when people say you will be saying, like, if you want
to. Okay. Well, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand. So if this was, say, the 1960s and he was occupying university buildings, protesting the Vietnam War, would would that be grounds for deporting him? Or really, if he was engaging in that kind of activity for any, let's say, more popular or acceptable viewpoint today, that would be grounds for deporting him. If we're going to draw the distinction, if we're going to draw the distinction between speech and
this.
action, yeah.
I would say this. If I now get a visa to Canada and I go to Canada, start an organization that repeatedly breaks the laws, forget the rhetoric and everything, but start an organization that repeatedly breaks the law. And then the Canadian government says, sorry, Shai, you can no longer stay here. I wouldn't cry boohoo, right? Now, if a Canadian person, that's a different thing. That's about citizens. That's why my third question was, how do we treat different groups, right? If you had, 1939 to 1945, a German national that is here on some non-citizen, stay, would come in support of Nazi Germany, and they got deported, I wouldn't shed a tear. No.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure I understand if what you're proposing is a purely objective, content neutral standard. So that's why I gave the examples of somewhat more, what we might say admirable types of civil disobedience in breaking the law. And you would agree that in those cases, or would you agree in those cases that an immigrant doing those sorts of activities should be deported as well?
I believe if we want to go on content neutral, because it really is difficult to do a content neutral objective, but let's say if we're going to do a content neutral objective, when you get a visa or a green card, you get into a contract with your host country, just like myself, just like everyone else. You get into a contract. A contract has objective things of what you can and cannot do. If you violate the stipulations of your contract, then the contract is over and you do not get to enjoy the benefits of the contract. In this situation is staying in the United States because you have violated the stipulations of the contract.
Okay.
That, I think, to me is the content neutral objective. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to understand your position. So I take it, based on what you're saying, the answers to my scenarios, my hypothetical scenarios, is that you would agree that in those cases the immigrant could be deported or should be deported.
I'll take you even, yeah. You know what? If Mahmoud Khalil came here on a student visa and started organizing the Weber Underground that came directly from the Colombia protests for the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Right? And he led the Weber Underground. Yes, I think a person like that, if they are not a citizen, should be deported. If they are a citizen, they deal with other consequences. Why? Because I personally don't think that putting bombs in post office buildings is free speech. I think the government also agrees with me. I think that saying go Weber Underground is free speech, and you shouldn't be held, you don't break the law by saying that. But yeah, I believe that if you come to a country that's not your own, just like I did, and you start organizing activities that are illegal, and let's say not a one-time or a two-time occurrence, right? Repeated, and breaking multiple rules, I think accountability means that yes, you will be deported.
Okay. So it seems to be that maybe you do accept a certain amount of I'm trying to put words in your mouth. I understand what you're saying, that you would accept a certain amount of civil disobedience, but when it crosses a line, then you feel that it warrants deportation, and you feel that's what happened in this case.
And by whom? Right, exactly. Now civil disobedience is actually not a stranger to me. In July 2023, I was protesting after, a lot of times I was protesting Israel's government because I completely disagreed with its policies that I saw as anti-democratic policies. I was at a protest. For some reason, draw of the luck, I don't know, an undercover police officer clocked me and punched me in the face. It was not a pleasant thing.
I didn't think so.
but I engaged in some form of civil disobedience. I was protesting where I was not allowed to protest. I suffered the consequences that, again, were illegal consequences. They shouldn't have punched me in the face, obviously, and I got off easy. Other protesters got way worse than me. But that is how society works. You cannot have civil disobedience and not expect accountability, because then civil disobedience becomes like a social media, oh, I'll just press like and everybody loves me. Like, the whole point of civil disobedience is you cross the boundaries with the expectation that when you cross the boundaries, you're going to raise awareness by that. And by the way, Mahmoud Khalil has been great in that. He has raised awareness by, probably facing deportation. Unfortunately, he has not raised awareness to the almost 40,000 non-Colombia educated, mostly Hispanic and less educated immigrants that are being detained every year by us.
Okay, and
Become a partisan.
you're saying the consequences of deportation. I'll finish now because I know other people have comments, but I was really just trying to understand your boundaries here. The consequence of deportation is appropriate regardless of the issue or ideology that's being advocated if those actions cross a certain line.
Yes, because if I started making it by ideology, then we would get to a point there, oh, so when it fits my ideology,
Well,
it's
that's my concern. That's my
and
concern, that if he were doing this sort of thing in favor of some kind of domestic civil rights movement, we wouldn't see this kind of reaction. But it's because of the particular ideology, particular beliefs that he's espousing that are leading to it. And that's what I was trying to get to. But you seem to be consistent as best I can tell.
I
So
mean,
thank you. I won't say any more.
no, I think it's a great. I think you're raising great issues. I think they're extremely important, and I love the hypotheticals. But in the same sense, we're not dealing with hypotheticals. We're dealing with real situations that are happening. And by the way, I give people, like, a lot of times since everything started, people have been asking me like, oh, you're trying to silence the protests. You're trying to take away people's freedom of speech. And I say, no, not at all. I'm trying to create to remove the double standard, because universities know very well how to quell freedom of speech when any other minority is being targeted. Black, Asian, gay, lesbian, trans, immigrant, any other. The only time that a free speech argument is invoked, not in the university, but in the United States, when it comes to a minority, it's when Jews are targeted. And in
I
fact,
don't think that's true.
I
I don't think that's the only time. I think that's a bit of a
what's the famous Supreme Court case of free speech and protests?
You mean the Skokie?
Skokie.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I agree, but I don't
What's
think
another
the Jews are the
famous? No, but
only.
what's another famous Supreme Court case?
Well,
dealing with?
I'm afraid I didn't come prepared for that question, but
No, but
I think I could find something if I made it.
that's exactly the point. Everybody comes prepared to Skokie because that's the one that made it to the Supreme Court. To best of my knowledge, there has not been a case where African Americans, Asians, immigrants, lesbians, gays, trans are targeted by a group, and yet the government says freedom of speech.
That's actually not true. Hate speech codes are commonly struck down by federal courts on free speech grounds, and those are laws designed to protect. Well, at least ostensibly, that's how they're promoted, to protect minorities, racial minorities in particular. And U.S. federal courts have been pretty consistent in striking those down as violating free speech.
Right, but
Sure.
again, the when I talk about protests, like,
Okay.
yeah, but I think it's an important thing to remember in all of this, that we invoke free speech a lot of times, but when it comes to a specific minority, a specific issue, that is why I try to stay as content neutral, because I see the double standard and I try not to engage in the same double standard.
Thank you.
I think we should move on. I hear yeah.
I'm sorry.
Alex, go ahead.
Kyung has his hand up.
Yes. Kyung Suk.
Oh, that's not my actual name. My name is Sua Kim. I don't know why my screen name's like that. Anyway,
Sorry.
I had a question. So I read in an article that um that the arrest was made like by police officers that wouldn't give Khalil's wife like their names, and he was led into an unmarked car. Um, I'm not sure how much that of that is legal, but I was wondering like how much of an impact would that make in court? Because that was like his arrest was like really shady.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It was legal. In fact, I've done some digging into this. This is how ICE works, which I don't like lack of transparency. They have reasons for that because, typically like it's like a cat and mouse game, when you're trying to catch someone who every day spent. I'm talking about most of the people that get deported and detained and deported by ICE are not Columbia educated Mahmoud Khalil. It's just like run-of-the-mill individuals that cross the border because they need a better way to live. Um, but it is shady, even if it's legal. And and to me, transparency is the most important thing in a government. That's why due process, like that's how we make sure that everything. And like the government could have done it way better, achieved the exact same um, aims, in my opinion, without creating this red scare. And but that's again, it's I've learned not to expect too much from the American government, regardless if it's Republicans or Democrats. They do things, for media rather than for process. But to the best of my knowledge, it is legal, which is crazy.
But it's hard to say that you advocate transparency and at the same time it's okay for these people to show up, not give their names, not even say that they're from ICE. None of that sounds very transparent to me, whether
Right,
it's
that's what I'm
legal or
saying.
not.
They should have. I think one of the greatest travesties that we're seeing now is that what is now the opposition, the Democrats, had 4 years to change the processes to make sure that the processes are in line with the vision of a true democracy, and didn't do anything because they'd rather be in an opposition and shout rather than when you like. I wish ICE was completely revamped in the past 4 years, given that most of the people that were in government in the 2020 to 2024 were 2016 to 2020 talking about how ICE is bad, but then used the exact same processes when they were in power and now are back again to saying ICE is bad. Right?
I don't think the issue is ICE is bad or ICE is good. I think the issue is what kind of democracy do we want to live in? Look, whatever we think about the particulars of Mahmoud Khalil, I think that we've entered a period of enormous fear on our campuses and among our students. I don't think that's good for learning. I don't think that's good for health. And I don't think it's good for democracy.
Why do you think, can I really like ask an honest question? You say we entered a time. I'd
Yeah,
say
I mean, we entered a time, Shai, because since January 20th, my international students have been walking around in terror. They've been scrubbing their social media feeds because they're afraid perhaps they appeared at a protest or even that they were walking behind a protest
I
and somebody is going to see that and say they can't have a visa. So,
but no, I agree with that. But my qualm is, why do you think we entered it now?
well,
For years,
because there weren't people weren't having their visas revoked
right? But
with no
people,
transparency, by the way.
I
None.
would say that there's always been fear on campus. There's always been shutting down of free speech, but it's been done in the undemocratic ways of the extreme left rather than the undemocratic ways of the extreme right. And
If you
like,
want to say there have been double standards, I'm
no,
fine.
no, no, not double standards, not double standards. I'm saying actual silencing of students who disagree with the homogenous faculty, actual silencing and firing and not hiring of professors. So the shift of the undemocratic aspect has shifted. It was not democratic before January 20th. It was
Right,
just
but
it was just
look, I mean,
targeting different people.
I agree with you that we at the university have not always been consistent in the way we've upheld these values, 100%. But two things. First of all, it's different when the government does it. You know this, right? It's different when it's ordered by Donald Trump. Okay,
I
that's point number one, because that's censorship out of the barrel of a gun, right? That's censorship that can land you in like a prison in Louisiana, right? That wasn't happening on our campuses, right? Secondly, I agree with you, right? I think both sides have been radically inconsistent on this subject. People on the left who were complaining that speech was violent and we have to get rid of hate speech. Now, when somebody says from the river to the sea, they go all ACLU on us and they say that's free speech. By the way, I think it is free speech. I think it should be protected. But I think the people who are defending it should be honest enough to acknowledge that there are lots of people, and not just Jews, who hear that statement as violent. That is not a good reason to censor it, but perhaps it's a good reason to look backwards and reconsider some of our assumptions. At the same time, the people on the right have been radically inconsistent because
I agree with you. I actually agree with you, and more than I disagree. But I do have to say, yes, it's different when the enemy of democracy comes from the government. But I'm no less scared by the enemy of democracy coming from the elitist mob than it is from the government. Because when the universities and the cahoots, that's not less scary for democracy. And I don't know, you said you're at Penn, so I don't know at Penn. At Columbia, about 90% of registered voters vote for one party. I'm not going to say which party, but it's one party. That is the rest, the other 10%, about, if I'm not mistaken, 6% are independent, meaning for either, and then 4% for the other party. Right now,
look, and
one
Shai,
second.
that's a problem, and I've written
It's
about
not.
how it's a problem.
No, but it's more than a problem, because that is what means, like, yes, it won't land you, your opinions won't land you in jail, but they will land you on unemployment. They will land you out of your career. They will land you out of your
But
state.
Shai, here's the thing. The same party, this is the inconsistency on the right. The same party that was complaining, I think justly, about this thing called cancel culture. They become the cancelers in chief. Trump is the canceler in chief. Trump ran saying we have this problem called cancel culture. He was right about that. And then he became the canceler in chief out of the barrel of a gun. So they're just as inconsistent as the people on the left. They were complaining about these imbalances,
I agree.
and they were complaining about how certain voices were being stifled. And now what they're doing is they're sending agents all over the United States trying to find pictures of people that were at rallies saying things they don't like.
I agree.
That is cancel culture out of the barrel of a gun.
I completely agree. I think, and let me make this clear. If you are at a protest, if you protest it, if you post it on social media, something that is to the dislike of the government, you should not be held accountable for that, because that's your free speech. Now,
right, but that's what's happening. That is absolutely what's happening.
Let's first hear from a couple of audience members.
Okay,
I know it's getting late. Alex, go ahead and read Sean and Peter's.
Okay, so Sean posted this comment. He says he worries that the detention of Khalil is part of a wider process of targeting foreign resident students and academics who are more vulnerable to punitive, arbitrary legal action than native-born citizens. He says he is puzzled that American-born citizen activists involved at Columbia University protests, who arguably broke the law, like Carlson or student Kimani James, are currently out of focus, while foreign-born activists on green cards and student visas, who are at most guilty by association, are now being targeted for detention and deportation.
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of this.
Let's first hear from Peter. Go ahead. Go ahead and finish, Alex.
Okay, so we have also some brief comments by Peter McCulloch. So I think that was in response to when Professor Davidai was talking about this idea of a contract between a green card holder and the government. He said, he says there's a contract of sorts with every person on US soil, due process in the US Constitution. And his second comment, I think, was in response to this idea of the government, invoking free speech in response to hateful comments targeting a specific group, and the Jewish people. That was what Professor Davidai was talking about. Professor McCulloch said transgender folks might differ on that, on the idea that only Jewish people somehow, have this free speech defense applied to them.
Well, so
Okay. Oh, just
yeah.
a minute. Oh, thank you, Alex. Joe, you had your hands up. Did you have another comment or question?
No. Is it still up? How do I turn
Oh,
it
yeah.
down?
Okay, sure.
Okay. I
That's
don't.
fine. So that was from Sean.
Normally, I'm not asking questions. Normally, I'm fielding questions. So let me. I didn't ignore it. I'll figure out how
Okay.
to do it. Yeah.
That's fine. So that was from Sean and Peter. Oh, and also I had a quick question. I think the two scenarios is that Mahmoud Khalil is a leader of the protests. My question is, in terms of operational control, did he tell did he kind of tell the people to invade the buildings, or was he more like a negotiator that he didn't tell the people to invade the buildings, but he saw himself as a negotiator between those who did and the university? And so I was wondering, what is the evidence on that account? Okay, thank you. So go ahead and please respond to Sean, Peter, and myself. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, look, so I'll start with Sean's point. I think you're absolutely right. I think the focus on foreign-born or foreign students or whatever is almost like a deflection, because the bigger problem is American-born, and not even American-born citizens, students. It's American-born professors. I've been saying that from the very beginning. They are the big problem, right? But like everything else, governments deal with what they can, not what they need. I disagree with the at most guilty by association. That's an interpretation that has nothing to do with reality. Again, it's not someone like Mahmoud Khalil, not guilty by association. He was the leader. Now, still is, to the best of my knowledge. In terms of where due process comes, I don't know how the legal system works in deportation court, but I assume if the government argues leadership role, then they would have to show some evidence of leadership role. Painting someone as not the leader because they weren't the one to click send on the social media post that called people to take over a building, but they were the one that organized it. That's meaningless to me. That's a meaningless thing because we don't have leaders then.
Right, but none of those things were factors, as best we know, in the government's decision to arrest and deport the guy.
Well,
Right?
we don't know.
They did that under a statute that claimed that he was working against the foreign policy interests of the United States.
Not with Mahmoud Khalil, other people, yes, but
right.
not.
I mean, the issue you're raising is important in terms of Colombia's own decisions, right, about whom to sanction. But I think we have to keep that separate from what happened to him under the law and what agents of the state did. They weren't there making arguments about who pressed the button, right, and whether he was a leader of this group. They just decreed that this guy was in violation of the foreign policy interests of the United States. And to me, that does sound like China.
So let me ask you this, really with complete honesty. If you really think he wasn't the focus of the arrest because not because he's the leader, but just because he's some guy in these protests. One second. Let me.
Oh, no. Surely he was a leader. Nobody's contesting that.
And but he was a leader, and the government targeted him as the leader, right? They could have started with any of the other 40% of international students at Columbia, and with the many. They started with him because he was the leader.
No, Shai, obviously that's right. But what I'm saying is these distinctions about whether, he operationalized this, that, the takeover of the building, or whether, he put this in motion. Um, uh, that's a question about Colombia's disciplinary rules. And I don't think that that entered into the question of him being arrested. Like, did he incite some sort of encampment or some sort of building takeover? It was indeed, like you're saying, because he was the leader, right? But I think in the second case, right, it really is like explicitly about his views and where they sit
Wait, what's the second
vis-a-vis
case? I'm
the
sorry.
foreign policy of the United States.
What's the
And
second
that
case?
seems like a terrifying idea to me, that we would be arresting anybody because we think that their speech or even their leadership of an organization runs counter to what we've deemed to be the foreign policy of the United States, even though we know that Americans disagree deeply about those foreign policies. I don't want Donald Trump declaring A, what our singular foreign policy is, and B, arresting people based on his understanding of whether they accord with that foreign policy or not. That's not America to me.
Yeah, so you mentioned the second case. I don't understand what the second case is, because the guy was arrested for deportation because he led an organization that repeatedly broke the rules, took over buildings, and targeted a minority on campus. So
Right,
what?
but I don't think that that's the government's case against him. Okay, because the government's case is under a law about violating the foreign or contradicting the foreign policy of the United States.
Is it
And
the
that's
case?
a terrifying idea.
Look,
Literally a terrifying idea.
that's why I said early on, Mahmoud Khalil can get deported for many, many reasons that have nothing to do with the 1952 law.
Yes, my student has one more question, and then you guys can finish this. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Megan. Okay.
Hello, my name is Megan. I'm from the United States, but I'm studying here as a full-time student in Korea. I know Professor Davidai, I hope I said that right, is he earlier mentioned kind of the difference in legal rights between American citizens, visa holders, and then more permanent like green card holders. I was wondering if you guys kind of have a distinction of what those different rights might look like. For example, me as a student here in Korea, I know that I actually can get deported for attending any sort of political activity or protest here. So much as like going to a protest will kind of get me deported. But I wasn't sure what your guys' views are in terms of like how that plays out in America and like what the difference between those like three categories of people are, since the media does kind of tend to cover more some than others.
Again, we've got 50 years of case law on this, and the courts have made it absolutely clear that people who are here on visas, people who are here with green cards, they have free speech rights, period. Absolutely. Because if they didn't, all right, if they didn't, in many ways, they would be unable to participate in the give and take of American life. The reason these people come here, especially as students, is to engage in the deliberations around all the questions we're talking about. It would be deeply, deeply contradictory and deeply self-defeating to bring people to the United States on student visas on the grounds that, hey, this is a great democracy where we have this robust debate, and then kick them out when they say something we don't like. All right. So the courts have been absolutely clear about this, right? We need to accord free speech rights to these people who are, again, not full citizens. But the reason we do is they're actually a part of this robust debate. And in fact, one of the ways we learn about ourselves is by talking with people that aren't us. I want my international students to speak up and speak up loudly. And often they're going to say things that I disagree with. And I think that's kind of why we brought them here. Like, I have no interest in having them repeat whatever bromide the United States is promulgating, or that I'm promulgating for that matter, right?
That makes you a good professor.
Sorry?
That makes you a good professor, but I can see why you're not teaching at Columbia then.
I want to be contradicted, right? But in order for that to happen, right, we have to protect the free speech rights of everybody. Period. Full
I agree.
stop.
I completely agree on that. I think that the question is, again, it's not about whether protecting free speech or not. It's at what point do we say it crosses to action, right? Kill this guy, or kill everyone, kill Whitey, right? Is free speech. Killing Whitey is not free speech, right?
No, right, but kill
At what
Whitey
point?
is, and that's why hate speech is protected, right? So the
Right. So the
biggest
question is,
threat-
at what point is the crossing from free speech to the action? And that's the whole conversation. If we try to dumb this down to like this is just a free speech issue, we're not doing anything good for Mahmoud Khalil or for the United States of America. If what happens at the end of all of this case is either everyone can get deported for whatever thing, that's horrible. But if what happens is anyone can say or do anything without accountability, that's equally horrible. That is not democracy either. So the
Right,
question
but see, Shai, again, here we have laws about this, right? I
Right.
mean, like think of the laws around terrorist organizations, right? So
Right.
Hamas has been designated by the United States as a terrorist organization. And what the law says is you can't give material support to a terrorist organization.
Right.
That's what the law says.
Well,
So
but the
if
green
we
card
found-
application is not that. The
Sorry?
green card application says material, financial, or any other support. And that is an important thing. Now, what I find interesting is, sorry, I gotta close this. What I find interesting is that the whole argument of we have laws, but then objecting to the 1952 law. So you can't pick and choose the laws you like and not the choose you don't
fair
like.
enough. I mean, fair enough. He was arrested under a law that has never been actually tried in court, and my deepest hope is that it will be overturned. But you're right. I mean, it is a law. It's been almost never invoked, by the way. I mean, who knows even who came up with it? I mean, I think there have been who came up with it in the Trump administration. I mean, I'm sure it was somebody just going through all these laws, trying to find something on the books that we could use to penalize this guy. I mean, it's not like there have been like thousands of people that have been put in the slammer, under this 1952 law, right? That would be a different matter. This is obscure in the extreme, which is why every American should be
But a law is a
suspicious.
law. Like we can't argue for one law and against the other. Again, but I agree with you. Like I think this will be tested, and I hope it's tested well. I do want to note there's two comments by Peter in the Peter says kill Whitey is arguably a formal violation of Title VI and would be sanctionable by university verbi. I agree with you, and it not only will be sanctionable, it will be sanctioned. But kill Zionists, I'm Israeli, that's who I am, is also arguably a violation, and yet no university of big name has done that. And you say Zionist is a nationality, even if it is, a nationality, it is a protected class by the 1964 Civil Rights Act. National origin is it? So in that case,
But again, we've got to be really clear here. Samuel Johnson said that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. Now it's Title VI is the last refuge of the scoundrel, and here's why. Title VI doesn't say you can't say kill Whitey or you can't say kill Zionists. What Title VI says is that if there is a demonstrable and long-standing pattern of discrimination that universities are enjoined by the law to address it. Okay, that's what it says, right? And so these are really important distinctions, right? It isn't just any random statement. You have to show that there is a long-term pattern here.
Right,
And
like a year and a half, a year and a half of averaging a protest a week.
And look, reasonable people can disagree about all those things, right? But it's not just a matter of like one statement is illegal and another isn't. I mean, right? And we need to be really, really vigilant about these distinctions. Like, I agree with Shai that there have been a lot of invidious double standards. And there have been a lot of people who have defended hateful speech against Jews who would never defend hateful speech against other people. I agree with that 100%. But the answer to a double standard is a single one,
Yeah,
always and at all times.
I agree.
And so we just need to be a lot more consistent in the way that we practice these values.
I also wanted to ask because Peter asks, it says, I'm curious if Shai Davidai is still proud or regrets his speech here, and that's the speech I alluded to from October 18th, 2023. Peter, if I may ask, I don't know if you can show yourself or just text, right? Why would I regret the speech? Like there's an assumption here that I would regret it. So
The assumption would be your own. I asked a question to someone who I've never spoken to before, and I joined this Heterodox Academy activity in part to hear each of you speak. And so I'm asking you an open question here. How do you feel about this thing, this video now?
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, because so I honestly, I'm so proud. I brought to the national attention a problem that a few people were mentioning, but not a lot of people actually wanted to tackle. I am disconcerted by how the issue is being dealt with now, but I I think knowing of the problem is extremely important. I think my wife says it best. She says that Donald Trump administration has horrible solutions to real problems. And I think what she doesn't say, which I think I would add, is that the previous administration pretended that there wasn't a problem. And between the decision of horrible solutions to real problems or pretending there isn't a problem, I prefer the horrible solutions and being vigilant to make sure that we, make sure those solutions don't create more problems, rather than saying, well, I want to pretend that there isn't a problem in the first place. So,
I
yeah.
guess I want to ask a point of clarification. I heard you say that you prefer horrible solutions
To real problems.
Okay, you prefer horrible solutions. Got it.
Yeah. Well, not to better solutions.
Well, I mean, why don't you just go and shoot every student? That would be a horrible solution.
Because it would create bigger problems. That's
Okay.
what you notice what I say.
Nuance. Gotcha.
That's the whole point, right? It's preferring horrible solutions to real problems than pretending the problem isn't there is not more democratic. Democracy doesn't get stronger if we just pretend the problem isn't there, right? Now, of course, when you have a horrible solution that might weaken democracy, that's upon us, the populace, to make sure that it doesn't get to that point. But pretending the problem doesn't exist is not the way to go on anything. Climate change, right? First, free speech, Second Amendment, right? Gun rights, everything. One side has a horrible solution to a real problem. The other side says there's no problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter and Shai. We need to wrap this up soon. One of my students had a question for Jonathan. The question was, so let's say Columbia student protests, and then some protesters are saying kill the Jews. Do you think, would that kind of speech be protected? That's question number one. And also question number two for Jonathan, this is from me. So if the US government finds evidence that Mahmoud Khalil had kind of operational control over the building occupation, then you think that's grounds for, law breaking and deportation. Would you agree with that?
Well, let's take the first question, about hate speech. Look, the first question actually echoes that fateful congressional testimony involving Claudine Gay and Liz McGill, where they were in that gotcha moment asked by Representative Stefanik, if somebody was calling for genocide, would that be protected? And, they made the mistake of actually telling the truth. And the truth is it depends on the context. And of course, it was all theater, but actually it's true because everything in speech depends on context. That is, what the law says is that that is protected unless it is creating an immediate and direct threat of physical harm, which sometimes it may be.
That would be true in a public university, not in a private university.
Now,
They could have easily said it's not protected at Columbia, Harvard, MIT, whatever.
right.
Because we are a private
But
institution.
again, that would have been the wrong answer in my view, because these universities have all said that they abide by the norms of the First Amendment. Here's what I wish they had said. I wish they had said, if it's not posing a direct threat to of violence, kill Jews or commit genocide would be protected because we believe in the First Amendment. However, Representative Stepanek, we should also admit that we ourselves have not been consistent enough in the way that we have protected this value, and that we too have engaged in certain kinds of invidious censorship. And what we need to do is be much more direct and much more consistent in allowing everybody their say. Everybody. And with respect to hate speech, who's the biggest purveyor of hate speech on the planet? Salman Rushdie. He hasn't come up tonight, but I think he's super relevant. Now, let me emphasize that I do not personally believe that Salman Rushdie engages in hate speech, not at all. But I could prove to you that millions, possibly hundreds of millions of people believe that, to the point of trying to kill him several times. If you decide that what you're going to do is to remove something that you find deeply hateful, forget about Salman Rushdie. He's out because he absolutely engages in hate speech. And it seems like we just can't learn this lesson. We can't learn the lesson that almost everything is going to seem hateful to somebody. And you cannot allow the authorities to define what is so hateful that nobody can hear it. Otherwise, again, forget about Rushdie, because he's not going to be able to speak. And by the way, Rushdie himself is very aware of all of this. And I've heard him in person several times say that he believes that if he tried to publish the Satanic Verses today, that he couldn't get it into print. And if he's right, that says something really horrible about our moment.
I'll tell you even more. Try to be a Zionist and publish a book now. It's not that you can't. You won't get it into print, right? That's the whole point. Like the freedom of speech. Yes, government is extremely important. We have to focus on it, but don't be delusioned that we have freedom of speech. The media, the universities, they are all silencing certain groups, not randomly, specific groups, specific.
But again, that's the reason to be vigilant and consistent about, as best we can, protecting everything.
But the question becomes, I think the question becomes, and we didn't really talk about this, but if a university silences free speech, private university, they don't have to do anything, but they decided that you cannot say kill. You can say kill the Jews apparently, but you cannot say kill blacks, Asians, anything else, right? And the government comes and says, you're a private institution, but we're going to take taxpayers' money from you. Is that a problem? Because the government shouldn't be supporting the suppression of free speech.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Again, I'm not saying that I want this government, any other, to be micromanaging all the speech on the campus. But at the same time, I think you're making a good point, right? I think one of the things we've learned since January 20th is that none of the universities are actually private. Like we keep saying, no way, Columbia and Penn are private. Well, yes, technically, right? They have a private board of trustees, but they're also deeply imbricated in the American state, right? There are hundreds of millions, billions of government dollars that float through these institutions, not just in the form of research, but in the form of government aid to students, right? Which is also in the billions. And by the way, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff that's happened because of that. More and more people have gotten to go to college. more and more incredible research has been done. Not that it's all incredible, but right? I mean, there have been wonderful fruits of that. And you know, in fairness to Shai, I do think that that brings us a certain set of responsibilities to abide by the law, especially the First Amendment law, that we have not always been consistent about. And that's real. And we should use this moment to remind ourselves of that.
I want to give Shai the last word, but before we do so, I wanted to thank everybody for participating in Heterodox Academy. I think Jonathan and Shai really exemplify the Heterodox Academy norms of civil and thoughtful debate. And I really encourage, Jonathan's already a member, and I really encourage Shai to think about, I hope you'll join us and also be a member of Heterodox Academy. Okay, Shai, you have the last word, and then afterwards we will clap and then close the session. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Shai.
I honestly, I don't need the last word. I think I don't even see it as a debate. It was a great conversation. I think you know, we stretch our, you know, our boundaries to see where we agree and disagree. The one thing that I would ask, and maybe you can do this after, and like a survey. I would want you to survey the people in attendance or in the group on their views on this specific issue with Mahmoud Khalil, because that's the thing we saw. You know, not general, but this specific issue. Because if a group like Heterodox Academy becomes homogenous in its thinking, then can it call itself Heterodox Academy any longer, right? It's if you're just heterodox to the homogeneity of academia in general, then you're not heterodox. You're counter, you know, whatever, countercultural. So I would push you to see, is there like a consensus or almost consensus here, which I feel like, at least from the people that, you know, the questions and the things, but I may be wrong, or is there really some heterodoxy here in the views that, you know, knowing that like the truth is somewhere in the middle between Jonathan and I.
I just like to say that I also really enjoyed the conversation, and I've been an admirer of Shai Davidai just because he's raised his voice, and that's what I value. I think if we go back in time, we might find that our ancestors were in the same shtetl somewhere in Lithuania. But I'll look forward to having coffee with him sometime when I'm in New York.
And you're and everyone is, and by the way, and maybe this will be my last word, because I think no matter what happens with Mahmoud Khalil and all these other people, we have to remember their humanity. We have to remember that they are people. In fact, despite wanting to hold them accountable, I hold the leaders of these organizations in utmost respect because they never hide their faces. They speak up. In fact, that's the only way that they got, you know, identified, because they, like myself, you know, believe in something and stood up. I think they're absolutely wrong, but that's the point, right? I wish we weren't at this point where speech crossed to action. But like we can't look back, we can only look forward. So hopefully we're going to brave this moment, and whatever government comes next, if we're worried about the rules and process, we got to bolster rules and processes before anything else. But really, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan, you know, for this really great conversation.
Okay, building on what Shai said, we have a public comments Google Doc. So audience members, please share your thoughts. Shai wants to hear from you, what everyone thinks. And obviously, you know, audience members, you can write whatever you want, but for Heterodox Academy, we do, you know, we really try to invite speakers from different perspectives to offer their thoughtful, you know, views. And I'm very glad that Jonathan and Shai did. Thank you very much. So let's give them a round of applause. Yes, Jonathan, you had a word?
No. I just want to thank all of you for your participation and for the conversation. And thanks to Joseph for bringing us together. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Good night, New York,
Okay,
and
good night.
and Philadelphia from Seoul, Korea. Thank you. Bye bye.
Good night. Good morning.
Right. Good morning and good night. Okay. Hey, Francis. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
I'm so sorry, Joseph, and I did manage to catch the last part of the fantastic discussion. Yes, I have been moving a bit between Singapore and Bangkok, which have different time zones, so I got a little bit mixed up there. But thank you very much for carrying that, Alex and Joseph, and our two speakers.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Peter, Joe, and everyone else for your great comments. Okay, you guys can go. Thank you. I have to go to class now. Bye-bye. Okay. I'm gonna kick everyone out. Sorry. Thank you.